Hello, everyone, and welcome to a candidate forum for Minnesota House Representative District 8A. My name is Susan Nelson. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Duluth and a trained and certified League of Women Voters moderator. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Duluth, I would like to thank the candidates for their willingness to participate in government and in this general issues pre-primary forum for the office of Minnesota House of Representatives District 8A, which includes most of precincts 16 through 35 and from 6th Avenue east, west, and up towards the mall, and so on. This forum will be presented on PACT-TV and linked to the League of Women Voters of Duluth website. The League posts complete, unedited recordings of forums. Editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan political purposes. You may share this forum in its entirety. The League of Women Voters believes that an informed citizenry is the foundation of effective democracy. The League is open to membership for men and women who are interested in nonpartisan civic participation. It's a volunteer organization working at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties or candidates. So the views expressed at this forum are those of the participating candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters of Duluth. And sponsorship of this forum is not a league endorsement of any individual candidates participating. The League of Women Voters Duluth realizes that creative and innovative policies and practices are forged out of diverse points of view. We believe diverse perspectives are necessary for responsible and representative decision-making. We will sustain our commitment to welcome and facilitate diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our work. We strive to include people from a mix of abilities and backgrounds in all of our activities. At this time, I would like to introduce the candidates for Minnesota House of Representatives, District 8A. Candidate Jordon Johnson and candidate Peter Johnson. Our forum will begin with the candidates giving a 2-minute opening statement, followed by the questioning round. Questions have been vetted by a League of Women Voters of Duluth Forum Committee and questions submitted by League committees and by citizens on the League website. Candidates were not given the questions in advance. Each candidate will be given up to 1.5 minutes in which to provide their responses to the questions. The questioning round has been set up so that each candidate will be asked questions in a rotating order. After the question round is completed, each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute closing statement prior to the end of the forum. So the candidates will now provide their prepared opening statement. We will begin with candidate Jordon Johnson.
Good day. My name is Jordon. I use he, him pronouns and was born and raised in Duluth by a single, strong mother in the 1970s and 80s when it was rare to be a single parent. We struggled financially, and the majority of my childhood we were unstably housed, which meant we were sleeping wherever we could that night. I moved away from my mom at 15, stayed with friends and family until I graduated Marshall High School. And the local doctors and nurses at St. Mary's Hospital, as well as my teachers and social workers at Marshall, saved my life after surviving a self-inflicted gunshot wound at 17. I'm a first-generation college student as a doctorate and with a doctorate in American Studies, and have taught future social workers, was the executive director of a local nonprofit working to support homeless youth for the last 4 years, and have been working to end racism, lift up LGBTQ community members, my community, and advocate for environmental justice for the last 2 decades. I decided to run because I believe in the power of the people and our democracy. I believe we need to have people with lived experiences who have built relationships with community members at the table when decisions are being made about our community's lives. I'm a solid and strong voice for the people, for women, for our working class families, for our Indigenous, Black, and multiracial community members, for our workforce, and for you as voters. I've been lifting up the voices of communities throughout my career and will not hesitate to stand up for all of us. Together we all rise, and together we co-create sustainable policies for our future generations, investing in education, the future of housing, caring for our environment, protecting our workforce, access to healthcare, ending structural racism, and forward thinking are my priorities. We can do it together. This is why I am running to be your next state representative.
Thank you. Then we'll hear next an opening statement from candidate Pete Johnson.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity just to introduce myself and give a little bit about who I am and why I'm running as well. I grew up in rural Lake County. My parents carved out a little spot in the forest up there. My mom was a nurse, my dad a Vietnam veteran who was using the GI Bill to go back to school while he was building the house that they currently live in today. We didn't have electricity until I was around 9 years old, didn't have running water, indoor plumbing until I was probably 6 or 7. We didn't have a lot of excess, but my parents did everything they could to provide for us and make sure that we had the things that we need, including that support. After graduating high school, I went off to college at St. Cloud State, and then shortly after graduating from St. Cloud, I started my career in the fire service, which has been over 22 years now. The first department I worked for was just outside of Denver, and then in 2005, I returned back here to Duluth and started my job here with the Duluth Fire Department. Those 22 years as a firefighter is really one of the biggest reasons why I'm running. Time and time again, over those years, I realized that when we get called to help somebody, quite often that issue that they're facing is rooted in something further, deeper, something that we can't solve in that snapshot in time. Sometimes it's an education issue. Sometimes it's a housing issue. Sometimes it's an access to health insurance or healthcare issue. Sometimes it's a jobs issue. And realizing that we can't solve those problems in that short snapshot in time. I also want to bring the perspective of somebody who's got kids that are currently navigating the school system, our educational system, and a spouse who's an educator in our public schools. I hope that by focusing on those key issues, housing, education, access to healthcare, building a middle class for more people, and making sure that when we fund those priorities, they're getting down to those folks that really need it, everybody will have that base to be healthy and successful, and will find themselves less in that point of despair and needing to call 911, hoping that somebody can show up and solve their problem or help them.
Thank you. Now we'll move to those questions that have been solicited by the organizing committee. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond. We will begin with candidate Pete Johnson. First question is on economic development. What will you do to support a vibrant economy across Minnesota and to address rising inflation?
I think a lot of that comes back to investing in the people that work here and the workers that we can provide and get more growth in our communities. Minnesota is regularly ranked as one of the best places to do business, even though it has higher tax rates than some of the surrounding areas. And I believe that's because we invest in things like education, we invest in job training, we invest in the communities that people want to live. And Duluth is a great example of that. Duluth is a place where people want to come. Duluth is a place that people want to live. But in order for us to have that strong and vibrant economy, we have to have ability for those people to come here, to find places to live, to have jobs for their spouses, have a strong educational system for their kids, have a health care system where they can get the help when and how they need it. And ultimately, I believe that will also draw in those businesses and those drivers to ultimately make our economy more strong and more vibrant and more diverse.
Thank you. We'll move on to candidate Jordon Johnson on the same question.
Yeah, I think the economic development, our economy is a critical piece. Housing is a part of that, is an economic issue. I think also looking at a regenerative economy. So not just what the industries want to bring to us, but what do our communities want and how do we start to redevelop our communities? How can we get our people who are invested in coming to our area to also pay the taxes and we don't just incentivize tax breaks for large corporations? How are they contributing to the community? I think also once we start to lift up and raise high wages and get wages to where they need to be for everyone across the board, then we start to kind of see how we can kind of prosper as an economy throughout the state of Minnesota. Duluth is a great area to live, and people are drawn to this area. But I think we also need to think around infrastructure in regards to kind of environmental concerns. So we are not just continuing to extract historically from our communities, but how are we reinvesting and putting money back into our communities? And through the kind of looking at how our tax structure is set up, what taxes look like, and how there's kind of opportunity to kind of incentivize our future businesses, future leaders, I think is important. I also think we need to start focusing on supporting our small businesses. And we need to figure out how to lift those small businesses up and support locally. So thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Jordon Johnson will go first on the next question, which is on gun legislation. What legislation, if any, would you support to reduce gun violence in Minnesota?
I greatly appreciate this question around gun violence. As one who survived from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, from having our community just recently experience gun situation in the community, in the neighborhood, I think we need to really think around what gun reform looks like. It has historically been thought of as a public health issue, and it is. Young black men are the highest suicide rates, are also the highest homicide rates. I think also it's become a very divisive conversation. And so we need to think around how do we make it about public safety? What do we need to look at in regards to who we are and how we show up for one another? So gun reform is a vital issue. It's about how do we protect safety? What does that safety look like? Whether it's, requiring people to have their guns locked up and safe. I come from a family of hunters too, so hunting is a big issue, and it's also important for our indigenous communities as well. And so being mindful of how we're moving forward with gun reform and gun policy is a critical component for me as somebody who has survived a gunshot wound. And once you pull that trigger, there's no turning back. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Representative Pete Johnson for his reply.
It is absolutely a problem that we're seeing throughout our communities, both in rural settings, both in urban settings across the state, across the country, and seems like it's a uniquely American issue. Over having discussions like this in the past, it seems to really set people into their corners, and it's difficult for folks to often find some of that middle ground. As somebody who grew up with firearms in the house, somebody who went to firearm and hunter safety when I was 11 years old, somebody who went and took that training to become a firearm safety instructor as an adult. I think it's valuable to start having these discussions from that position of safety. The vast majority of the gun violence and gun deaths and injuries that we see are they're suicides, they're kids finding firearms in the home. Supporting those safe storage laws, I think, are important. As a responsible gun owner, I would never leave a firearm loaded or unattended where my children or somebody else's children or somebody else could get access to that. Also, the reporting of lost and stolen firearms, so we really know what is out there and where and how those things, where and how those firearms are tracked, and if they're lost, how we recover them. Those are pieces of legislation that have been introduced in the past. Ultimately, they fail. Hopefully, by bringing some other folks into that conversation, maybe we can change that direction and get more people to the table to have this discussion, because it's going to take everyone to solve it.
Thank you. Candidate Pete Johnson will go first on the next question, which is on the subject of mining. The mission of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is to work with Minnesotans to conserve and manage the state's natural resources, to provide outdoor recreation activities, and to provide for commercial uses of natural resources in a way that creates a sustainable quality of life. From their website. The question is, do you believe that the DNR's mission should be only conserving and protecting natural resources and leave the commercial development up to another agency department, particularly in regard to the copper sulfite mine, North Met, Polymet? And please explain.
Yes, I do think those things should be separated. This is something that has been talked about for a long time, but having those conflicting directives for the DNR to both protect and conserve, but also try and develop and monetize some of those natural resources really puts them at odds with their own missions. And by pairing those out and having a different agency, whether that's an economic development agency or something else, be responsible for the commercialization part of it and keeping the DNR more in the conserving and protecting, I think allows the folks who work in those divisions to not have those conflicted ideas. Hopefully that means that, under different administrations and the changing of the winds, that agency still stays the course and still does the work that ultimately they're required to do. But yes, I would absolutely support separating that out and making sure that that agency isn't put in that conflict and having to do two things that at times don't mesh with one another.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from candidate Jordon Johnson.
So mining is a really heart-wrenching area for me. And the reason being is because when I was in New Mexico doing my doctorate study, I worked with a community who was impacted by the uranium legacy there. And I witnessed and watched the amount of health impacts, not just to the people, but to their livestock, their land. And this is all Navajo Nation indigenous community members. So for me, thinking around mining, I would really want to think around what are the health impacts and working with the community that is in that surrounding area to figure out what makes sense for them. I know there's issues around who's regulating it, what does it look like, pulling the natural resources, but I think we also need to start to think around what are the health consequences that have been documented historically in relationship to mining. You talk about generations of children that have experienced neurological issues, and our workers who have been challenged. It's not just about the water, it's about the dust people are inhaling, it's all these various components. So for me, I would really want to think through what does it look like and have conversation and consultation with our community members, particularly our indigenous community members in regards to mining. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Jordon Johnson will be the first responder on the next question, which is on immigration. Regarding immigration, what is your position in regard to state and local law enforcement cooperating with federal immigration services?
So immigration reform is critical. And I want to see a pathway for our community members to have citizenship. And so I don't necessarily support this kind of federal policing of people who are coming to our community to contribute and live a life and raise their children. And so for me, thinking around immigration and supporting our workers who are working, and making sure wage theft issues are not in relationship to that. So we're not policing our community members. I understand, but you also think around DACA, right? So what are the regulations in regards to opportunities for children who are members of immigrant communities? So those are the pieces that are important to me. I think we really need to look at immigration as also an economic opportunity for our community. Our demographics are changing throughout the country, and our demographics are changing throughout the state. And so we need to kind of figure out how to support and lift up our immigrant community members and allow people to thrive and prosper here. Thank you.
Okay, let's hear from candidate Pete Johnson on the subject of immigration.
Could you repeat the question for me, please?
It's in regards to immigration, what is your position in regard to state and local law enforcement cooperating with federal services?
I don't think that that's a role that they should be playing. I think we have federal agencies that is their role and their responsibility, and that's a different conversation on how they do that. I work side by side with our police officers here in Duluth, and they are already short-staffed. They're already struggling to get to the calls that they need to get to with the right amount of folks to make a difference. So layering that on top and making them more responsible for the enforcement of those immigration laws is not something that is maybe within their bandwidth right now. And of course, that would be conversations that would have to be had with the police chief and the leadership within the police department. But anecdotally, that's what it looks like from the outside. The other fear with having changes like that where local law enforcement or state law enforcement are more responsible for enforcing that immigration law is you're going to create a reluctance for people to call for help and call for law enforcement when they need it. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you're a resident of Duluth, a visitor of Duluth, or Minnesota, or the state, or wherever. If you're an immigrant, if you're working here, if you're traveling through, you should, if you feel like you need to call 911 for assistance, whether that's through the fire department and EMS or whether that's through law enforcement, you shouldn't have to feel afraid that your immigration status is going to impact your ability or cause you not to call for that help.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Pete Johnson will speak first on the next question, which has to do with climate change or global warming. We hear two phrases in regard to the temperature, weather, and landscape changes taking place in the world: climate change and global warming. The question is, what actions can or should the Minnesota legislature take to mitigate the effects of climate change?
This is a tough question. It's a question that is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. We saw that with the last two winters we had. We had one winter where we broke records for snow, and then we had the next winter we broke records for lack of snow. We're seeing things change, and we're seeing them change rapidly within our lifetimes. Climate change is just that. It's not a regional thing. It's not a state thing. It doesn't stop at state lines. It's important for us to start figuring out how we create relationships, not just within our state, but within our neighboring states, within the region, within the country, within the world, to make a difference on this. It is impacting everyone. Locally, I think we can be leaders in some of the infrastructure issues, whether that is improving our electrical grid with storage options so that when we do have those renewable sources, we have good ways to store that energy so that it can be used. It has to do with building out our transportation infrastructure so that there's more reliable public transportation available to get us from, let's say, Duluth down to the metro. It means building out the infrastructure for electric vehicles so that if somebody wants to travel across the country, they can do so, and it doesn't look different than it does today when they're using a gas car or something like that. Those are some of the barriers, talking to people as I've been out and talking to voters and everything else, that people are concerned about when it comes to that. And I think those are things that we can start with locally as we build those relationships and nationally and internationally to make a difference on this issue.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Jordon Johnson.
Can you repeat the question one more time for me, please?
What actions can or should the Minnesota legislature take to mitigate the effects of climate change?
Yeah, I think Minnesota, we need to do our part, and we are. So we have the 2023 Clean Energy Bill to remove to renewable energy. We need to provide incentives for climate resiliency. And look at what we need to stop funding as well. Infrastructure is a critical part to resiliency and what that looks like. I think we also need to look at how do we kind of residential and building codes to ensure that we can move people to decarbonizing heating and cooling systems in their homes and in our buildings. I also want to look at policies in regards to moving buildings off natural gas. Assisting our residents, primarily who are working class or low income, to kind of shift to clean heat options and work closely with our community partners to create more equitable policies so everyone benefits. But I think also we need to kind of call hearings to hold state agencies accountable for the laws that already are implemented and ensure that we identify what other regulations need to be in place as we move into this kind of transition period. This is a life situation here, and we need to ensure that we are not just kind of replicating harm that we've done historically to our Indigenous, Black, and multiracial community members in regards to toxic waste and facilities and things of the nature. So thank you for the question.
Okay. Candidate Jordon Johnson will speak first on the next question, which is on affordable housing. How is the state providing support for affordable housing projects locally?
So I appreciate the question, and I think of it as the future of housing. And I just want to honor Dr. Josie Johnson, who was the first African-American woman who advocated for the Fair Housing Act in Minnesota in 1961. And I bring her name up because she was persistent around working with community members and elected officials to get housing passed for her community. And so when we talk about housing here and stable housing, it's the foundation for people's livelihood. It provides a stable kind of place for people to feel the sacredness of who they are. So if we look at housing as an economic issue, again, I go back to thinking around what development is happening in our communities, but we don't just finance kind of people interested in building multi-complex units. We are short on units, I understand that, but I don't want to do it on the backs of community members or on the backs of our local supportive service organizations. I also want to think around, I've been having many conversations with the kind of abandoned houses in our community and neighborhoods. And so how do we start to be creative in thinking around what are the kind of house structures already in place that we could potentially redevelop and repurpose to provide housing for local families. I think also corporate investments, kind of regulating corporate investors on single-family households is important. Home ownership is a way to build economic wealth. So that's a few of the areas I would address.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Pete Johnson on the subject of affordable housing.
Affordable housing is a huge issue here in Duluth and across the state. I spent 9 years on Center City Housing's board of directors. They're a local nonprofit that does a lot of focusing on that community that's some of the hardest to house, folks who are battling substance abuse issues or mental health issues or physical health issues. They have models and buildings that are transitional, permanent for families, for youth, for single adults. That need is great, and that organization is continually being asked to expand and do more across not just our region but the state. And realizing over that time of serving with Center City Housing, I learned a lot. One of the things I learned that is so impactful for when Minnesota does invest in housing, and a lot of the financing that organization gets is through the Minnesota Housing, which is funded by the state, and they've made some great investments here in these organizations. But there's a difference between housing and supportive housing. And when we're housing some of those hardest to house folks and trying to make sure that we keep them housed, having those supportive services be on site so that people have access to healthcare, have access to other resources through the county, and make sure that they're getting everything they're eligible for is very, very important. But it will take state partnerships with local cities and counties to help solve this problem, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's not a multifamily building. It's not a single-family building. It is truly will take all kinds of solutions.
Okay, and candidate Pete Johnson will speak first on the next question, which has to do with some education programs. Regardless of what happens at the federal level, what will you do to ensure that school meal programs and early childhood education programs remain available to Minnesota families?
This is one of the things that I think our state should be extremely proud of, is the meals program that they instituted after the legislative session in 2023. Like I said, my wife is a school teacher. She teaches elementary school. She has seen the impact that has made. She sees very clearly within the first few days of school, or that first week of school, which kids are not getting food regularly at home, the kids that are not having a stable place to sleep every night, and the impact that has on their ability to learn and keep up with the classmates. Starting and making sure that we maintain that, it's not just a human issue. It has an impact on those kids going forward, and it's something that I hope to be able to take that experience and get folks who that has impacted and make sure that we do keep that in place and expand it if we need to. When it comes to early childhood education and care, that is, when we talk about economic development, that is one of the hardest things for young families to, or any family, to manage or deal with. One, it's finding childcare that's available at early education or getting them into those programs. There is such a demand. And then it's the cost, whether or not you can afford to send your kids to those programs or whether or not you can afford all the other things that come with it. So figuring out how we make sure more kids are eligible and have more providers to give as many kids that early head start or that jump into education as possible for that stability, and ultimately it improves their learning going forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from candidate Jordon Johnson on retaining school meal programs and early childhood education.
Investing in education is one of my priorities, and having food and nutritional food is critical to the health and well-being of our future generations. And so also 3 to 4 year olds, about 60%, 50-60% of our 3 to 4 year olds are not in a learning environment right now. That's problematic. We spend a lot of time in education. Education, the school system saved my life, even though I struggled in my education. But I pursued, and I was there. And it's the people who are there, the educators and social workers and assistants who supported me. I am encouraging us to consider how do we move forward with a universal pre-K early childhood kind of policy and to expand what we already have in place for our young people. I encourage people. I was talking to a woman at the door one day, and she led me to this film called Love Them First. It's the lessons from Lucy Lane Elementary School, and I encourage everyone to watch that school. It's about northern Minneapolis. It's about how do we support our young people at a young age so that they can thrive and they believe in themselves. And that is something that we need to look at, that we're not just standardizing tests, that we're actually investing in our teachers and the young people. They are our future leaders. They are the future you and me. So that's how I would stand up for our future generations.
Okay, thank you. And so candidate Jordon Johnson would be speaking first on the next question, which is on infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We've all been hearing about infrastructure plans, large and small, such as the replacement of the Blotnick Bridge, the cleanup of the St. Louis River, and lead abatement in the city of Duluth. What infrastructure plans would you like to see advanced for our region and why?
So infrastructure is an important area to invest in, and because one, it provides high-wage jobs, health benefits, retirement options, but it's an investment in a kind of thinking around climate resiliency. So if we think of the transit systems, what does that look like for us locally? If we think around how we are kind of moving in this particular district, the access to transportation out towards West Duluth, Gary, New Duluth, where if there's development happening out there, then how do we provide that kind of access that's in relationship to climate change? And so, and as we start to transition into this kind of area, I think the bridges have been here for a long time, ever since I was a young one, and so we need to think around how to support that. But infrastructure is also a way to kind of bring in and lift up our communities who are struggling. And so it's a way to kind of help provide an opportunity, whether it's through the trades or through the unions, so that people can have a high wage. So those are some of the pieces that I can just speak to right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Pete Johnson on infrastructure.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and this topic came up about infrastructure and bonding and things like that. And his comment was, our values are as much a part of our infrastructure as anything else. And that really resonated with me, and when you start looking at that. And if we want to put our values into how we look at infrastructure, it has to be overlaid with what the other things that we're dealing with, whether it is education and making sure that the buildings that we're funding through those infrastructure projects are, energy efficient and are meeting the needs of those communities. It means clean water and wastewater treatment systems so that we protect that resource. It means building and rebuilding roads and bridges so that we don't have more catastrophes like we did down when the I-35 bridge collapsed. It means focusing on renewable energy and making sure that that infrastructure is in place, like we talked about earlier, to address some of those transportation needs. And ultimately it does. It puts people to work. They are generally good jobs. They're union jobs. Those projects are run with project labor agreements so that the folks working on them, whether they're in a union or not, are getting a fair wage for the work that they do. And those infrastructure projects absolutely are huge for this community, whether they are our schools, whether they are our universities, whether there are roads and bridges, or whether there are water infrastructure. So figuring out how we make those adjustments and how we advocate for those things going forward is something that I'm looking forward to do.
Thank you. So candidate Pete Johnson will speak first on the next question, which has to do with the area of health care. Minnesotans are growing older. What measures would you support to ensure quality care for seniors, especially those who can't afford elder care and/or assistance for their caregivers?
This is something that, as firefighters, we see on a regular basis. We respond to folks for all, like I said, for all kinds of reasons, and a lot of the people that we respond to are in that aging category, those aging population, and they're afraid of what happens if they call us sometimes. If they have to go into the hospital, will they be able to come home? Because that's where they want to be. So figuring out how we keep people either in their homes or in homes that are suitable for an aging population. And this goes back to the housing discussion. Here in our region, we don't have a lot of great options for seniors and aging populations when they get older. My parents are in that boat right now. They still live on the house that they've lived in for 40-some years. And it's hard for them to keep up. Having more options that are highly energy efficient, single family homes that are single levels, that are in communities that have transportation available to them, ultimately makes the quality of life better for those folks. It allows them to get the care that they need. It allows them to have that social and that community that they need. But I think it's important to make sure that we have those options. Apartment style living isn't for everybody, but it is for some folks. Single family houses or duplexes are good for some people, but not for everybody else. But making sure that that population can age with dignity in a way that is safe and they get access to the care that they need when they need it is extremely important. And bringing folks into that conversation to help craft those solutions is absolutely something I'm going to do. Okay,
let's hear from candidate Jordon Johnson.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I think as an only child and a mom who's single and 84, and thinking around elder care is really a vital component for us. And one of the things I think about is how do we create a single-payer healthcare system in the state of Minnesota. So access to transportation would be available if they wanted to go to appointments or rehabilitation. I drive my mom to and from right now, and so thinking around how do we provide opportunities for transportation to appointments if needed. How do we kind of think about people who might be in their houses and who want to stay in their houses, that we can help assist them in kind of renovating those houses so they're accessible and kind of meet the needs of their circumstances. I think of also, healthcare is not just around the physical health, but people's emotional health and well-being, like being in community, providing some sense of kind of interaction and community engagement is important as well. And so when I think around how do we actually care for the elders who raised us, they raised us, you all raised us. In many regards, it's like giving back. And I want to do what's best for our community in giving back. And I would connect with our elder community to think through what they would like to see happen. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And candidate Jordon Johnson will speak first on our last question before we move on to closing remarks. And this question has to do with election integrity. Do you think misinformation and disinformation affects our ability to conduct free and fair elections? And if so, what can the state of Minnesota do to remedy this?
I appreciate the question because misinformation critically impacts the realities of what people are living with. And so we need to ensure that there is a way to regulate how information is circulated and distributed. And I feel like, in all honesty, this is something that we really need to kind of come together, and I would pull together a collective group of people to think through how do we do this on a legislative level, and how do we reinforce this and enforce this on a larger kind of level that might take place. And so I'm going to be honest, like, I don't know exactly what that piece of legislation would look like, but I think integrity of who we are and what we're sharing is vital. We need to provide people with the facts, the history, the knowledge, and understand that that is what makes us and myself as a candidate who I am. Like, I want you to know my history and who I am and not have misinformation circulating about me. And the lies about community members should not be circulating. We should understand and make decisions based on the facts and the realities that our communities are living with. So, to be determined of what that might exactly look like, but I am wholeheartedly invested in making sure that that happens.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from candidate Pete Johnson on election integrity.
I think mis and disinformation absolutely does have a huge impact on our elections. And you see that on not just Minnesota, but you see it across the country in what happens and how some of our poll workers are treated for giving them their time to make sure these elections are go off without a hitch. And a huge amount of appreciation for the folks that do that work year in and year out. What can Minnesota do? Minnesota has some of the highest, if not the highest, voter turnout in the nation. I think it's a testament to our system that people still believe in our system. They're not deciding not to vote because they don't trust it. But we have to protect that. And I think, can we legislate our ways to that? I don't know if we can or not. Being transparent in our processes is very important when people do have questions, that they can get honest and straightforward answers. But the other thing that we can do is have conversations with our neighbors, with our friends, with our coworkers. As I've been knocking on doors for a few weeks now, and as I knock on doors, I've run into some folks that disagree with me. And it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to, have those discussions. And usually after, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour, they might not agree with me, but we've had a discussion. I've, shared what I thought is important. They've disagreed and shared what they've thought is important. But most of those conversations end with a handshake and, wishing each other good luck. I think there's still room to have those conversations, but if we stop having those, it will continue to get worse.
Thank you. At this time, we'll ask each candidate to give a 2-minute closing statement, and we'll hear first from candidate Pete Johnson.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters and also thank my opponent, Jordon, here for being part of this and putting this on. I think this was a testament to what you folks do every single election cycle to get questions asked and get that information out, and I think it's extremely important. I want to lay out why I think I'm the best candidate to represent this district at this point in time. With 22 years as a firefighter, I've responded to folks throughout our district when they're having some of their worst days, when they're having some of their most vulnerable times, and seen all corners of it. With 16 years as a union officer, I've represented and worked with members across the political spectrum. I've negotiated contracts. I've stood shoulder to shoulder with other working people fighting for workers' rights. With 9 years serving on Center City Housing's board of directors, including 3 years as the board president, and I learned a great deal about some of the housing issues that we're facing, but then also how we craft some of those solutions to have the biggest impact going forward. And how important it is for folks to have safe and secure places to live. With 6 years as a girls lacrosse coach and board member, I've worked with families from diverse backgrounds to make sure that any kid who wants to play has that opportunity to play, and seeing the value in how those teams or other curriculars have and the impact they have on those kids, from building confidence to friend networks to building out that support system that they need. As a husband to an elementary school teacher and a dad to 2 middle school daughters, my approach to education will be shaped by real-time, real-world experiences. I believe that my experience and perspective will put me in a unique position to not only advocate for people from all corners of our district, but also be effective at building those coalitions needed to get that legislation passed in a way that's meaningful and does what it's intended to do. My goal, should I be elected, is to do the most amount of good for the most amount of people in whatever time that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hear a closing statement from candidate Jordon Johnson.
Yeah, first I want to thank the League of Women Voters of Minnesota and Duluth, as well as Public Access TV for this opportunity. And thank you, Pete, for sitting with this kind of forum. It's important, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with voters in this capacity, because I think it's incredibly valuable on many levels. But in closing, I just want to say we are in a particular moment, historically, culturally, and politically. And I'm a candidate who chooses hope. I believe we can create the change we want to see happen. I'm focused and highly attentive to what is happening on a national level and a local level. I've lived through times of hopelessness, and no one should ever have to feel that hopeless in their life. We can choose hope, and we can believe we can make a difference in the world. What we do now impacts generations to come. I have the knowledge, I have the relationships, I have the stamina, and I have the skill sets to move our communities and state forward in a sustainable and prosperous way where we lift all people up. Whether it be housing first, public safety, gun policy reform, climate resiliency, reproductive health, land or economic reparations, or ensuring our workers have fair wages and robust health care benefits and retirement benefits, I will work with and stand alongside you as your state representative. I ask for everyone to just get out and vote in the primary election and just make your voice heard. I ask for your vote and support in caring for our next 7 generations. And again, I just want to appreciate you for taking the time to view this. And again, my name is Jordon Johnson, and I hope to be your next state representative.
Thank you. This concludes the candidate forum for Minnesota House of Representatives District 8A. It's our purpose in sponsoring events such as this to provide you with an opportunity to hear the candidates discuss the issues that are important to you. There's never enough time to cover all of the issues in a limited time setting such as this. If your questions were not addressed, you should feel free to contact the candidates directly. We hope this helps you learn more about the candidates and the issues so you can make informed choices at the polls on Tuesday, August 13th. We thank the candidates, PACT-TV, and the viewers of this forum. PACT-TV will broadcast this forum and others. Check their listings for a schedule of times. The forums will also be posted on the League of Women Voters of Duluth website, lwvduluth.org. Thank you all.